Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show and another wacky week in South Africa. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing, sir?
Well, wacky week in South Africa. What can you say?
Indeed, indeed. And also, Miss Sara Gon. Sara, how are you doing?
Fine, thanks. Annoying things happening on the political scene. What can I say?
Indeed. So let me start off with a good news story because we really don't have enough of those. And it's a good news story with a little bit of a caveat. I won't go too into detail on it, but apparently there's been a police operation in KZN where 4 people have been arrested, including a scrapyard owner for being in possession of stolen copper cables worth 2.3 million rand. There was this big police operation, which we don't have to get into, but basically they went into the scrapyard and they found all this copper cable, and then they asked the scrapyard owner where you got it from, and he couldn't explain it. And they say they're going to further charge him with charges relating to economic sabotage, whatever that means. Okay, so I hope that the people responsible are prosecuted. It's good that they are catching some guys slightly higher up the chain rather than just the thieves themselves, because it's important to dismantle these things, but may it long continue. Okay, so let's get into our first full story of today, and this is some comments made by President Cyril Ramaphosa. He was speaking at the United Democratic Front, UDF's 40th anniversary event, and he said that he is forced to concede that Indian, colored, and white citizens in South Africa feel excluded from South Africa's political life and that the ANC was partly to blame. He talked a little bit about how the UDF slogan during the fight against apartheid had been "the UDF unites, apartheid divides," and that they needed a new sort of focus now because there's an initiative to restart the UDF, which disbanded back in 1991, to tackle the new enemies, as Ramaphosa described them, of poverty and unemployment, the new enemies of the people, as he called them. He said, many in our country, including some who are gathered here today, are disappointed that the non-racialism unity embodied by the United Democratic Front has been lost. To many, it has been supplanted by the ethnic chauvinism and factionalism, even in the liberation movement, the ANC. So, Terence, let me start off with this. A rare kind of, I would say, complete open endorsement of sort of non-racialism. By President Ramaphosa, who tends to, shall we say, not really get involved in these things. But what frustrates me about this is he's sort of talking almost as though he's not president of the country, as he's just kind of some political commentator. What do you make of these comments?
Rama Chameleon. Actually, if you remember, Culture Club was big when the UDF was around. Just strange coincidence. No, look, I said this is, Ramaphosa sounds like, often sounds like the guy who gets stopped at Bangkok airport with this like funny stuff in his bag and trying to explain to the Thai policeman that I didn't actually pack it. I'm left in a way, sourly speechless on this. Let's remember that Ramaphosa is known for using the phrase "our people," very clearly demarcating who's in and who's out. His government
and our people, it's clear, usually doesn't mean South Africans as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. The question of members of racial minorities. You can sort of go back into the late 1990s. By the 1999 election, there were people in the ANC sort of darkly warning Indian voters in KZN, you need the ANC doesn't need you. I remember when the BEE regulations were sort of expanded after a court challenge to include Chinese people. The Minister of Labour saying, "Oh, I know they're not coloureds because coloureds speak Afrikaans." I mean, it's sort of crass racial tub thumping. It's thoroughly ridiculous. Right now, You've got Malema. He's consciously pressing panic buttons for whites. This kill the Boer, kill the farmer stuff. All if Ramaphosa takes any of this seriously, I'm not saying take him to court, have him arrested or whatever. Come out and say, actually, this is like way bullshit. We've got to move on. And then you can do that without abandoning the affirmative action, whatever. But as you say, the sort of Ramaphosa standing around with a who farted look on his face. I don't know what's happening around me. I'm shocked.
Where did all of this racism come from? It just grew out of something, nothing to do with me.
But there's something else. The ANC, I think, Brian Pottinger's book gets into this. Anthony Butler also wrote something about this sort of superglue attachment it has to its past, when all of its legitimation and its orientation focuses backwards. So constantly looking back to the struggle as the source of your inspiration, almost the place where you wish from which you wish you had never escaped. Maybe I'm being presumptuous here, but I can't help thinking that millions and millions of people who participated in things like the rent boycotts and whatever, and these things were, often had very, very murky gray areas in them. I think there's danger to romanticize. I think many of them hoped that they would be able to leave the stuff behind, get on, become middle class, get a good job, and see their kids with a better life.
Right. It is interesting to me when you look at kind of the history of the ANC. I think a lot of the reason for the ANC's success is really kind of in the UDF, because in my understanding of the UDF, really, it was a thing that attracted a lot of people essentially into the ANC's orbit who were, and from all across South African society, who were, genuinely committed to the country, were often skilled or educated, and this was a great big force that helped the ANC really become the force that it is in South African politics today. And it's no mistake that the UDF, not always, but most of the time, was pretty committed, I think, to non-racialism, and that the ANC was at its height when it did have actually some genuine commitment to non-racialism. Of course, that has very much gone away, and the ANC is now left with this sort of thing where it will go from, as you talked about some incidences there of the kind of racial division and rhetoric that the ANC uses, but then still declares itself a non-racial organization. In fact, sometimes it has to twist itself into this pretzel shape of declaring that the racial rhetoric it's using is in fact non-racial, which is very distorted and perverse. Sara,
maybe that's a Thai police officer.
I would not be too impressed. So there was also an address by Popo Molefe, who's a former Northwest Province Premier, saying that daily we are witnessing concerted efforts by anti-democratic forces to reverse the advances toward nation building that we have begun making. Political parties of all stripes are not helping to consolidate our democracy, accountability, and provision of basic sustainable services. Instead, they spend valuable time shouting at one another and neglecting their constitutional obligations. This is at the same UDF event. What do you make of all of this, Sara?
I quite admire Popo Molefe. He's generally been a good guy. I think he was the chairman of PRASA, and he tried to unearth all the corruption. But as Terence said, it was very much, or as you said, as very much, the UDF was a formation of its time. It filled a gap that the ANC couldn't fill because of its circumstances. So as you say, into the orbit of the ANC came people, organizations and people from civic society, religious society, trade unions. So you really had quite an injection of both commitment and skill and talent into the UDF. And as Terence said, some not so kosher elements, But the very idea that, first of all, what Popo Molefe said is just a cliche. I mean, it absolutely says nothing. I mean, if he'd said, the ANC is ruining the country and the opposition parties must try and get together to take over, I would have paid more attention. But it was the standard thing that, and the parties are fighting with each other, and the constitutional project is dying, and it's just rubbish. I think the problem is that, as you just say, I echo all the comments about Cyril standing aside and observing all this racialism that must now become non-racialism, and he, the frog boiler, was a key totem of that. So there is that, but I think the problem is that the UDF was very much a formation of its time with the types of organizations that existed at the time in the circumstances. To resurrect something like the UDF now would be an unutterable failure. We are past the days where, we're past the days of struggle where people or organizations were filling in for other organizations that were banned or marginalized or whatever it may have been. Now we're in party politics, and the ANC's managed to destroy the country pretty much on its own. It can't gather that grouping together, and if that grouping wanted to have any recognition, it would have to be separate from the ANC. I mean, we've got the 115 big businesses signing up to their thing. If I think anything more than that, and it's just going to look farcical. I think the other thing to bear in mind with the ANC is that the ANC became non-racial very reluctantly, very, very reluctantly in the late 60s. So I don't think it's naturally in its DNA. And also, obviously we know that the politicking of, white monopoly capital and slamming and, destroying and encouraging people to immigrate, and we don't give a damn, you can go type of thing. So he's right, but I didn't trust him with the idea as far as I could throw him, and I don't think the UDF or anything similar to it is pertinent anymore.
Terence, any final thoughts?
I think that there's a couple of things. First of all, the idea of the UDF being creature of its time. I think first of all, it must be recognized that it did function as the internal wing of the ANC. During the 1980s, it vigorously denied that. I think in 1990, I think all but one of the national executive came out as underground members. So look, that is what it is. It engaged in certain activities that were, let's say, less than unitary. If I remember correctly, when they were launched, they said any organization could affiliate with them apart from Inkatha. There was a lot. There was this emerging conflict. So this wasn't just about winning some sort of freedom. This was also about who was going to rule. But here's the thing. The sense that you can resurrect this, I think, is the lie is given by the fact that you have the president of the country delivering the keynote address. It'd be like Pete Koornhof delivering the welcome address to the to the UDF, and Mitchell's Plain in 1983. Sorry, yes, things have changed. And finally, I think that what you see there is a gasp of a strain of political culture that goes through a lot of, let's say, the UDF's inheritors. That we desperately need the constitutional project to work. We need development. We need this. We need to combat corruption, and all of this we need to be done by the ANC as the natural leader of South Africa. So there was a very interesting paper written by published by the Centre for Civil Society, a very left-wing research body, about the Treatment Action Campaign, and there's a comment there from one of their from one of their leading lights. I forget the guy's name right now, and he said we could accept an ARV package from the ANC or the New National Party, which still existed at the time it was written. We could not accept it from the Democratic Alliance. In other words, the Treatment Action Campaign, campaigning for people's lives, would not take it if it did not come from from their sort of neck of the political woods. And I think until you get beyond that, South Africa is doomed to simply repeat the pathologies.
Right. And I will just say, expanding on my point from earlier, that the ANC was at its strongest when it embraced South Africans from all walks of life and all races and all
Yeah,
creeds
correct.
and all these sort of things. And it has fallen into dysfunction and chaos when it became more racialist and more kind of extractive and vengeful and focused on itself. So never mind the country, the ANC would do better if it returned to its non-racialism of the past. Yeah, well, it would also be good for the country too, but I don't think the arguments like that seem to have much sway on the ANC these days. But let's move on to our next story. Also, once again, speaking of Ramaphosa, the South African Reserve Bank has said that it has finished and put out, at least to the people it's going to put it out to, its report on the Phala Phala stuff, on the money that was stolen from Ramaphosa's couch, which still to me is just insane. The large number of US dollars that was apparently being hidden in this couch. It's finalized its investigation, and it says that it cannot conclude that Ntaba Nyoni estates or President Cyril Ramaphosa flouted foreign exchange control laws. They say, due to legislative requirements and constraints which apply to the SARB, the report by SARB into this matter is a private internal report and will not be made available to the public. They went on to explain the report. The initial phase involved a consideration of internal information and databases and analysis of cross-border foreign exchange transactions over the relevant period. This was followed by a more comprehensive phase involving FinServ requesting and receiving additional information and documents supplemented by statements and or affidavits, and thereafter conducting interviews with various individuals and liaising with other parties. FinServ also sought and obtained legal advice in relation to its investigation and the processes it followed based on the information, documentation, evidence received, considered as part of the investigation. They finalized their report and found that they could not conclude, is the word, the phrase they used, that Cyril Ramaphosa broke the law here. So the headline was, I think this is on News 24, Ramaphosa off the hook as SARB releases its Phala Phala report. Sarah, what do you make of this?
Well, I noticed in reading that report that SARB did say that this in no way affects any other form of investigation. In other words, this is the only thing we were looking at. And I'm sure the mandate was very tight and very much in terms of SARB regulations. I don't know. I just kind of, I know that if I've had the good fortune of traveling overseas and I've come back with foreign currency, I'm supposed to return it to, I'm supposed to declare the foreign currency. Obviously, only me and not the powers that be. You know what? Let's put. And I think, look, insofar as there's anything criminally illegal, I think SARB, it's not within SARB's mandate, and I think it's involved in a whole lot of other areas that would probably hush it up. He'd say didn't contravene. Okay, that would have been an easy way to get him, was, to say he contravened foreign exchange controls. But, I'm not sure I care. I know that may sound very whatever of me. But, there's something about the Phala Phala that I would like to see him meet the wrong end, if there's a wrong end to meet. But it's almost like, I don't care. We all know that the money probably came in to support his campaign for re-election. And they behave stupidly hiding it in a couch, and they deserve all the bad publicity and what they get. And as I said, if at least investigate further. I don't know enough about the SARB scope with regard to foreign exchange transactions to know to comment on whether it's right or wrong. I'm assuming it is right, but I'm sure that's the least of it. And but I'm not trying to get it anymore.
Yeah, it's just there's something so negligent about all of this and so weird about having this huge pile of money being stored in a couch that it's almost difficult to believe that something super illegal was not going on here. And at the very least, a staggering level of kind of negligence and incompetence. Now, to be fair, Ramaphosa was not apparently the one who made the decision to put the money in the couch, but it's still not great.
Yeah, just to say an answer to that is it that was so Keystone Cops-ish in its own way that it provided probably what we needed from the situation more than actually any result.
Terence, what do you make of all this?
Well, I'm just going to go back to that Thai policeman at the airport. You try to explain what you're doing with like how many million American dollars in your bag, and or like tins of white powder, and you see how far that gets you. What struck me about this, and I'm not quite, I don't know. I think that I can't shake the vicious, suspicious feeling that they phrased this as obscurely as they could, so that your ordinary dumbass like me can't fully understand it. But it seems that they were giving him a pass on this because the Sudanese businessman hadn't actually received his cows, it was buffalo. So it was like the transaction hadn't been perfected, which I gather means it hadn't been completed. So there was no entitlement to this money. Yeah, I don't know. Look, as I say, I'm these guys at SARS probably know a lot more about this than I do, so I'm not going to question anyone's professionalism. But yeah, I don't know. Look, if you're at a gangster's place and you find a lot of money, I mean, does he get off on the basis that you didn't actually earn this and it wasn't declared? You don't get in trouble. No, look, I don't know. I think at the very least, release the report. I hear what they're saying about how it's personal, but I do think that when one is the president of this great republic, the expectation of privacy does fall off slightly.
No, exactly.
Does seem to
me. Sara, any final thoughts on this?
No, I agree. I think this whole thing. I mean, I would push for that, and I would also ask to have put into the public domain Jacob Zuma's medical records, and then we could really have some fun.
Yeah, so developed slight cough needs to be excused from jail. Okay, so our last story for today is something that's been going on for 12 years, which is that the Health Professionals Council of South Africa was found to have been using illegal regulations to control doctors since 2011. The council is supposed to register health workers and keep a vision on their conduct and that kind of stuff. And it was found that in November 2011 that it had been using illegal regulations according to the Competition Commission, and that these regulations amounted to anti-competitive behavior. There was a report in 2015 against them urging the health minister to stop enforcing some of these regulations because they had been found by another part of government to be illegal. And 12 years later, nothing appears to have changed. In fact, recently it seems that the South African Medical Association, which, as Sara has explained to me, is the private, basically more private doctors and private healthcare professionals, is once again taking this up with the health minister, saying, why are you enforcing these regulations? Why are you fining doctors for regulations that are, according to a different part of government, illegal? It just doesn't make any sense. And why has it been going on for 12 years? Sara, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I had a little experience with the Health Professions Council of South Africa. I always had trouble with that, which echoed all the sort of corruption, incompetence, and delay that government entities are accustomed to bringing us, the public. But essentially, by all accounts, the new regulations would have had to have the approval or the go-ahead of the Minister of Health. And 3 ministers of health later never did anything about it. And the problem is, of course, one is obviously doctors losing money for things that should not have been contraventions. And the other is possibly reputational, depending on what the issue was that led to the fines. But the HPCSA is so symptomatic of the worst of the public service. And I know the doctors, after paying SARS, VAT, and PAYE, the thing they hate paying most is the annual fee to the HP, because they never get supported by the HPCSA. They are mostly they're mostly sort of followed by them and charged and complained about, and they are not friends to the people they register. They are very much there to pretty much make their lives a misery. So this doesn't surprise me very much, and the fact that our ministers didn't do anything about it doesn't surprise me very much either. I don't think this country has ever had a good Minister of Health. Not before 94 and not after 94. I'm probably just a little surprised that it took SARB this long to consider legal action. But
to be honest, Sarah, I don't think the country's been governed that well since 1910. I don't think that more than 100 years since South Africa's been around, we haven't done a particularly good job at governance.
Not one good health minister.
Terence, once again, this just seems like another instance of the kind of inertia that just you find it doesn't matter what level of government you go to or what policy you're talking about. There's just this kind of inertia that just prevents anything from ever changing.
Well, I think that this reminds me of the of something that our esteemed president once said in Parliament. Like we have something to the effect of, we have exhausted our resources. So who's this we and ours? You have resourced. You have exhausted ours. And there was a meme, doing the rounds. I think it was from Malusi Gigaba during his stint as finance minister. We've stolen all the money, now you must pay it back. And I think that yes, when you create an institution which which lacks a sort of continuity or an understanding of what it's overseeing, it will default to what institutions do, which is exercise control. And inertia can be an enormous factor, as you say. Inertia, just rolling it through. Because this is the set of rules we have. Yeah, they might be illegal and whatever and be destroying things, but that's your problem. Our problem is to enforce the laws that we have. For a state that functioned.
Sarah, any final thoughts just before we close up with that? I do have
give
one
you
more
an aspect of this matter that illustrates everything we've said. The organization has considered whether their legal advisor, their in-house legal advisor, should suffer for not having done anything about these regulations and creating new regulations, and whether he should be got rid of. And they decided they don't need to get rid of him because the Competition Commission findings came out before he was employed.
All right, so the last story I just very briefly want to talk about is this comment by Theo Diago, who's the executive director of the Southern African Agri Initiative, where he recently said that he found a whole bunch of solar panels were damaged. And this was kind of weird, and these were often new solar panels. And it turns out, according to him, that there is a European company which is making solar panels and then purposely breaking the edges of them to prevent them from being stolen. And this is specifically a thing they do for the South African market. Unsurprisingly, due to the huge problems with load shedding, particularly in the first half of the year, we've seen a massive increase, according to this story, a five-fold increase in the first quarter of this year as compared to the entirety of last year of how many batteries South Africa has imported. So lots of solar panels are now being stolen because, of course, they are popping up all over the place and suddenly they're quite valuable. Anyway, just thought that's a very South African story that there's a company out there breaking its solar panels just a little bit so that people don't want to steal them in the South African market. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day. We will see you tomorrow with the Daily Friend Wrap, which should be out at 5 tomorrow. And have a good one. Cheers, everyone.